välkommen till nya samtal av Feminist perspective of Kashmir. So it's organized by the Nordic Kashmir organization. A Nordic Kashmir organization is a small Kashmiri organization to give awareness of Kashmir conflict in Nordic and all, mostly in Sweden. So so we have Nitasha Kaul and Emma Brännlund from England. So
hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. So this session here today is going to be a little bit of a dialogue between me and Nitasha about feminist perspectives on Kashmir. So it's going to be quite informal, and we also hope for a lot of participation from the audience. So please write down all your questions and be ready to shoot them at us as soon as you can. And so how many of you were in the previous panel on solidarity and resistance? Okay, so the vast majority, so that's good. So you all are quite familiar, a little bit familiar about Kashmir by now, if you hadn't heard much about Kashmir from before. So I don't know whether we need to, for the few of you who weren't at the session earlier, I don't know how familiar are you with Kashmir? Do we need to kind of do a little bit of a recap of the political, social, cultural context? No? Okay, Nitasha is... No, we can't. Okay, it's too complicated. So, anyway, so as we were talking about in the previous session, so Kashmir, the Kashmir region is both a contested region between India and Pakistan. It is divided, has been divided since 1947 between the two countries, and people in both regions are, to various extents, claiming and seeking independence. And there's an ongoing, very active resistance movement in, particularly in the Kashmir Valley in India, in the state of Jammu and Kashmir in India. And this is a very, very brief. So I just wanted to kind of start off this conversation to ask Nitasha about how can we move politics in Kashmir forward? How can we reimagine a Kashmiri future? How can we think about resistance in Kashmir and a future for the pan-Kashmiri state, possibly, or pan-Kashmiri land that is anti-patriarchal, that is anti-nationalist, that is anti-militarist? And so, Nitasha, maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. So when I said that we can't do a recap, I didn't mean that you should not be made familiar with things that you've missed. I simply meant that we can't redo that other session. So literally, I mean, the question that Emma has asked me, and the question that we inevitably have to face if we have a session on the feminist perspectives on Kashmir, is what do we mean by a feminist perspective? What does it mean to have a feminist perspective on Kashmir? So I'll try and unpack that the best I can. So, as in that previous session, we were talking about looking at Kashmir as an occupation, right? And what are the conditions of resistance, and how do we create solidarities that are better around situations like this? Towards the end of that, I was just thinking that other questions popped up in my head, thinking about what, for example, what Noura was saying about how do we have anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, anti-racist solidarities. And I just thought of these questions, and maybe that would be a way of untangling some of this, since I will, as we agreed, I will give a detailed answer and then ask you a question. So really the question is also lots of other questions. The question of feminist perspectives on Kashmir. How do we make peace profitable? How do we get people to recognize that ending conflicts is profitable? Because a reason that a lot of political conflicts are either not recognized, or the conflicts keep on being going on throughout the decades and century even, is the fact that conflicts are profitable for specific kinds of actors. So how can we either undo that definition of profitability so that it is actually seen for what it is, which is violent and dehumanizing and killing, or how do we get people to see that peace actually is worth striving for? Because there are numerous ill-intentioned actors involved in political conflicts globally, in any conflict, including in Kashmir. but there are also actors who are acting out of a certain understanding, often a very narrow understanding of what they think their self-interest to be. And you asked that question towards the end of the Palestine and Kashmir case, and you said that the governments also have these deals with each other. So the governments, of course, do, and they use these places as colonial laboratories, these zones of conflict. But then the governments there are populations who themselves start to imagine their own role in all of this. So yesterday, for example, when the protesters in Kashmir were killed, run over, there were Indian people on Twitter saying, we're doing exactly what Israel is doing in Palestine, and great going, we should kill the terrorists. So they also enroll themselves into a certain mode of understanding where they see this as a vital part of how they imagine themselves being good patriots and good nationalists. So there is that question of how do we try and undo some of these understandings. Secondly, how do we these are rhetorical questions, but questions that I think we all need to think through. How do we elect governments that markets are not necessarily happy about? And I mean that also here and everywhere. How do we elect governments that actually care for populations, so that if you elect a government that's progressive, the stock market doesn't start to slide, or if it does, people understand that there are, how do we in fact sort of even start to unpick some of these fundamental structures that are so deeply rooted in excuse the long words, but a heteropatriarchal, capitalist, racist hierarchy of nation states. That is exactly what it is. It's an implicit hierarchy of nation states where the international community means a certain kind of state, not others. It's all tied into a very specific idea of gender as the exercise of a kind of power. It's capitalist and it's racist in the way in which lots of lives are used as disposable for as part of the system. So how do we do that? How do we also redo gender in non-hierarchical ways? Because if you look at a conflict, and to me, to say a feminist perspective, it's interpolated in all sorts of ways in this conflict. And we think about that, it's not only about looking at women or even looking only at Kashmiri women or solidarities with women. A feminist perspective would mean undoing this whole idea of this exercise of gender in a very hierarchical way. So it's not simply talking about the patriarchy in a society, and that's part of the problem, because like the old colonial struggles, in many cases, just like in the sort of 19th century British context, the British would see themselves as being white people saving brown women from brown men. There is a kind of liberal, tolerant narrative also in Indian mainstream that sees Indian people as saving Kashmiri women from Kashmiri men. And a very selective understanding of patriarchy within a society that and especially if it's a Muslim majority society, as if we're talking specifically about the region of Kashmir and not and not Jammu, there's this idea of picking up on selective aspects of that society to construct that as backward, as uniquely backward, as backward because it is Muslim, and as fundamentally flawed and cannot be fixed in any other way other than by colonial intervention. And that ties into a whole idea of legitimizing militarized presence, legitimizing emergency powers, legitimizing in fact an occupation, and continuing human rights abuses. Because these people are backward. They don't know, they're patriarchal, they're misogynist, etc. I mean, that kind of misogyny and patriarchy, no society is free from. So to uniquely pick on that, while not talking about the occupation and the ways in which militarism and masculinity are deeply tied into that project of the nation state, and what it and which wants a territory and which cannot see itself as negotiating on that or even demilitarizing or repealing emergency powers. So that is also, I think, an important part of re-envisioning that context, and also a feminist perspective on Kashmir, to understand why is it so deeply central for for Indian women and men, but also specifically men, to claim Kashmir as their own, to have these slogans and proverbs that are all about about how their masculinity will be enhanced by not sort of even thinking about giving an inch of territory. And literally these are the words, giving an inch, as if it is a territory they have and they have to give, or that or these narratives about kill all the Kashmiris, but the land is ours. So that deep centrality, you know, there's a kind of concept resonance between these ideas of gender, nation, and the way in which that is used to occupy land and dehumanize populations. And so that can be undone by, you know, by specific ways of thinking about the conflict, but also by thinking about the way in which this kind of nationalism, this kind of toxic nationalism functions, and how deeply central an idea of a masculinist, patriarchal narrative of the nation is to that story. You know, in the case of Kashmir, for example, it's not even nuanced in any way. The Indian narratives on Kashmir, it's not nuanced. I mean, literally, in cartographic sense, the idea is that to negotiate about Kashmir would be to behead the head of Mother India. There are other narratives where the relationship between India and Kashmir is envisioned as a marital relationship that's gone wrong, and that can be fixed if the husband, in this case India, treats the wife a little bit better. Which is to say, if we treated her better, if we gave her feminized territory again, if we gave her development, then she will stop being so petulant and demanding, and you know, and you could just discipline the territory in the same way as you would need to discipline your spouse or your wife, and that disciplining can sometimes take the form of chastising, can take the form of being violent. So in the summer of 2016, when there were the Indian killing of a Kashmiri militant who was very popular amongst the youth there, Burhan Wani, his Mujahideen militant, when he was killed, after that there was a spontaneous uprising in Kashmir that went on for months, and pellet guns were used. People were blinded. So in that, as this gained momentum, and you know, and various people, including like a 14-year-old girl, was blinded in her own home. Insha Malik was her name. Security guard was found pumped with pellets all over, you know, in all the organs of his body. He was just returning home from work. A lecturer was beaten to death in a place called Crew because he dared to question the police who wanted to do a search. So there were all kinds of like egregious, you know, instances of violence. When there was like attention, when the Indian media started to pay some attention, and the head of the Central Reserve Police Force was asked, when are you going to stop doing this? He said, when do you stop beating your wife? He later did apologize for the statements when there was an uproar. But there's this narrative that this is, you know, that there is a feminization of the territory and you can sort of, and a domination of the bodies that inhabit that territory. And a certain understanding of gender is very central to this, as it is to the idea of a nation, and now more and more in the Indian context, a masculinist Hindu awakened nation. That, you know, this kind of a Hindu supremacist awakened nation where a strong man leader who's leading the country, and the nation itself sees itself as this force that is occupying but also civilizing in the manner of all colonial projects. So I think that, you know, to sort of summarize, I guess my response would be that there are multiple points that we can undo this narrative, you know, around coloniality, around nation, around gender, and all of that is vital, because it does connect up in very systematic ways in the way in which you know, then that it facilitates the dehumanization. So as we agreed, I mean, my question in response to that, and we'll carry this conversation back and forth to you, would be, I wanted you to say a bit more about, you know, what we were talking about yesterday, about a Swedish presence in Kashmir and the form in which you experienced or came across that Swedish presence in Kashmir, firstly, and to reflect a bit more about this idea of a feminist foreign policy that Sweden has, and how do you see, you know, how would you connect a feminist foreign policy and Kashmir?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that, and it's really interesting when we think about a Swedish presence in Kashmir, because probably a lot of us here today, when we think about Swedish presence in Kashmir, it's more like a question mark. Is Sweden present in Kashmir? And the spontaneous answer would be no. Like, we hardly ever hear much about Kashmir and the events that Nitasha has described on the news, in Swedish newspapers and media. So Kashmir seems much more of a blind spot in Swedish discourse. In Sweden, we hear much more about Palestine, Syria, and other contexts and conflicts. However, I think that is itself a very important point in that this, when we choose not to speak about something, or that we don't choose not to report on specific events, that is also a strong political statement or a strong political action. But it's important to think about then when we have, at the moment, we have so-called a feminist government who has very strongly announced that they have a feminist foreign policy, and this, the feminist foreign policy, which is instituted throughout both the foreign policy declarations and a lot of the action plan that is set out by the current Green Social Democratic coalition government. And what is interesting with this feminist foreign policy is that it's focusing on some key areas, focusing on human rights, freedom from violence, peace building, women's political participation, economic independence, sexual and reproductive rights. And but here it's focusing particularly on women's engagement in peace building, and it's perceived, so looking at them, and I've done some work analyzing the foreign policy declarations, and I see women as objects that need to be funded, need to be empowered, and particularly to use Spivak's term, they need to be saved. You can see here that the foreign policy sets out Sweden, the Swedish government, Swedish Department of Foreign Affairs, as an agent that goes out to support, to fund, to organize women's organizations, mainly in the global south. And it's also infused in a liberal institutionalism and in an economic perspective where economic growth and capitalism is perceived as essential both for development and for the implementation of democracy and human rights. So this is, again, like when Nitasha would say, in terms of the importance of thinking of the role of the economy and around capitalism in driving foreign policy and in driving this peace-building work that's being done. And again, then where is Kashmir in that? There's very little, first of all, like obviously there's no direct engagement with, and not any funding going to Kashmiri organizations, to Kashmiri civil rights groups, or a women's organization. But however, but I think that kind of notion of funding is highly problematic in the first place. So we need to think about then is, I think we need to think about the kind of the political implications of a foreign policy that is setting out to be feminist, but at the same time is focusing on a very liberal and a fairly colonialist model of power that's being, and empowerment and knowledge being centered in the global north, in Sweden, and being kind of diffused, given out over the world. And at the same time, there is this blind spot about the political issues that is going on in Kashmir and Sweden's involvement in that, in terms of, you already highlighted in previous session about the role of Swedish arms deals, and the fact that even at the moment Saab is negotiating a very big deal with India that is worth something around 90 billion Swedish kronor, and to send for new aircrafts to being built in Sweden and sold to India. And in the past, for instance, between 2001 and 2010, the Swedish government had sold weapons for around 3.8 billion crowns to India. And so here again, so Sweden is an active participant in militarizing and keep on militarizing the Indian state. And similarly, Pakistan is also a big trade partner of Sweden. So between the same years, between 2001 and 2010, Pakistan had Sweden sold even more weapons to Pakistan, so for about 5.5 billion kronor. So in this way, so when Sweden is militarizing both sides and in this geopolitical conflict. And furthermore, Sweden as a state is also an investor in hydropower, both in the Kashmir region, which is a region that is very rich of natural resources. There's a big power plant, there's a big resource for hydropower, and Vattenfall, for instance, is a big actor, an economic actor in the region. So the Swedish economy is thriving and built partly on taking resources and benefiting on resources from the region. So again, like this is it's very important to think about this in terms of feminist foreign policy that is very much inspired by the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and kind of building the identity and the kind of position of Sweden as a country, a model of gender equality, of peace building, of being in the forefront of human rights, but at the same time is funding and sponsoring and fueling, feeding the conflict in multiple ways at the same time. Do you want to respond to that? Yeah.
So thanks, Emma. That's to the rest of you, I'll confess. So yesterday night, when we were going back from dinner, we were standing by the lift and thinking about this session today. And I don't think I shall ever forget Emma telling me about going to Gulmarg and seeing Vattenfall name everywhere and thinking about the presence of Sweden in Kashmir. And I think that when there's something systematic about what sorts of things are made visible and what are not, in the way in which systematic inequities are globally sustained. So populations that have been expelled as a result of conflicts, as a result of wars, that are trying to save their lives or find better opportunities, when they arrive at the shores of, and I'll use the term Fortress Europe, but it also applies for other countries that act in similar ways. When those populations arrive, these people are seen as invading our culture, right? So the dominant kind of narrative here is that these are people, these bodies look different than ours. Their skin color is different than ours. Their religion may be different. They are. How can they be part of us? They are here. And yet, there is also a reverse, very systematic global traffic that has been going on for centuries, which is the traffic of capital, of companies, of merchandise, which goes the other way around very often. And that is not seen as in any way importing any cultural values, or in any way disruptive to those communities in the same way, which are these corporations that, remake infrastructures, that redo the surroundings in those other parts of the global south. And they are not seen in the same way because they are not bodies. That's money. And money is just liquid and mobile, and bodies have to be stopped at borders. So it is, so there are systematic ways in which visibilities and invisibilities are created in how we understand this power to function. So that was something I was thinking about when I was, reflecting on how often the politics of the economic is erased, and the economic is seen as something that is transparent, and that's just about a deal. That's got nothing to do with anything else. And I say this as somebody, so I won't go into detail here, but you can look at my other work as so I've sort of worked in economics, philosophy, creative writing, and politics and IR. But that politics of the economic is completely erased, and within that context, these erasures also enable several parallel conversations to keep happening. And I think as feminists, we have to keep making the connections. They used to say, a woman's work is never done, feminist work is never done, and I don't think it'll ever be done even in the future, because we just have to keep at it. But it enables these parallel conversations to keep happening. So there is a conversation that we are having about these lives that that matter and how they are treated. And then there are those conversations which are about the infrastructures, the trade deals, the defense deals. And then there's that whole question of how is the hard and the soft binary created in these parallel conversations that are happening globally? Because those conversations which are about a transparent economic are the conversations that are seen as constructing the strategic hard inevitabilities. These are matters of the states, these are matters of trade, these are matters of profit, these are matters of affluence, and they've got nothing to do with these other questions that you people can talk about in your own, rooms and conversation alleys or whatever. So so it's vital to keep making these connections between these conversations which can otherwise seem parallel. There's that conversation, of the states, and as so the work of feminists, Cynthia Enloe is the first person I thought of, but feminists who have tried to sort of work through that category of the state, to perforate that category of the state, and to say that this is actually not what you make it out to be. This is all actually constructed and represents some very specific interests of specific actors. This is not some neutral, natural, normalized national interest. This is these specific people who are benefiting from this deal, and then you make it out to be about a state and a state's policy. So that was something I was thinking about. Then when you said, yeah, this idea of, I think also how we don't know about things in other parts of the world, and how we feel that not knowing about that doesn't affect us. And again, Spivak has post-colonial scholar Spivak terms this sanctioned ignorance. The ignorance that we can have because it doesn't affect us. It's a man saying that he doesn't need to know about periods or period pains or VAT on sanitary supplies because it doesn't affect him, right? He can afford not to know. It won't affect him in the same way. So likewise, these kinds of privileges that enable us not to know and to still go on with our lives. Whereas for other people, it may not be possible not to know about, what the EU wants to do on human rights, or what other, or what, for example, foreign policies might be, or what the solidarities with other struggles. So, like, who is the one who can afford not to know in these conflicts, and why? And Kashmiris, often have this thing about how people know about other struggles, but not about the Kashmiri ones. So they often say, well, people know about Tibet, they know about Palestine, but they don't know about Kashmir. And, and I don't want to say, earlier I did say that there's this way in which we cannot talk about patriarchies, which is not to say that there aren't patriarchies. There are several, sort of patriarchies that are in contest in a zone of occupation, and that also makes lots of things a lot harder to speak of in isolation. And I think that's why talking of this together makes sense. But also I think as people who are not there, but talk in these other places, it's also important to keep reminding ourselves of pasts as present, and what are the ways in which those pasts are not actually past. They continue to be a feature in the present, in the way in which, as we were saying before, grievability is constructed. The differential worth of lives across the globe, as Butler would say, is constructed. So I wanted to sort of first talk, mention these things that came to mind: the politics of the economic, the hard soft thing, and how we construct certain things that are seen as non-negotiably political and inevitable and strategic and sensitive when they reflect very specific conjunctions of interest. And thirdly, this idea of past as presence. And I think that, I could go on, but I think that's where I would, that's what I wanted to respond to in what you said.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I would like to kind of take up on your idea around, about different patriarchies and the kind of situatedness of patriarchy or patriarchies. And looking at, like in my work and my PhD work on Kashmir, I was looking at women's experiences of security and insecurity, and I specifically interviewed women who were engaged in various forms of activism, human rights activism, social work, journalists, etc. So kind of wide range of different actors. And what's quite interesting to see then was how militarism and occupation and politics were so intertwined with their various forms of gendered power relations. So you couldn't separate them. So the women spoke about the insecurities, the experiences in the home, the concerns of their families, of going outside, of being involved in activism, and that. But it was always in the kind of above the fear of being stopped or being interrupted by the army, and it was also kind of in terms of what would neighbors say, and kind of like making sure, because the community was always had an eye on what the women were doing, and also kind of what the local activists, local politicians. So again, like it's this kind of very ingrained, very kind of entangled or tangled up forms of various patriarchal powers gendered forms of power that were limiting women's opportunity to do their work. And despite of this, women did engage in various forms of protest, various forms of actions and activities, and they found different ways of negotiating the various hurdles that were presented to them, and sometimes playing into what could be perceived as possibly patriarchal constructions of gender, sometimes accentuating those and also resisting those. And these things are happening at the same time. It's really interesting to see. And as well, I think your point there on talking about the past as present, so looking at the grievability, and it's really interesting work being done partly by you and also by other scholars who are working in Kashmir on the role of funerals, and also how women as actors, as mothers, are actually actively engaged in interpolating their sons, to join militant groups or go out to the streets and tell stones, and so also actually actively engaging as fueling on the resistance. Quite often we get this image that women are always victims of violence. Women are always mothers are always the weeping, helpless, wailing for their sons. But here again, we can see how those type of very gendered positions also become kind of sites of action, agency, and resistance. Again, it's quite happening in many ways at the same time.
Thank you. So yeah, thank you. I was yes, exactly, and I think that since you asked me about the ways in which the women are part of that story, so there is. Fundamentally, occupation and resistance are both masculinist ventures. They both rely upon a certain idea of hegemonic masculinity, control, possession, and so on. Protection or possession, domination, protection, possession, all of that. So, yes, of course, the pitched, street encounters are between the soldiers who are men and mostly men who are part of the crowds that are protesting. But again, there are nuances there in the sense that there are women too who are sometimes part of these gatherings, not in quite the same way, but you will see any number of pictures of women also who are challenging soldiers, including elderly women. Last year there was, a moment where schoolgirls, especially there was a whole kind of thing where schoolgirls came out and protested on the streets, or where there were images circulated of schoolgirls throwing stones and in their school uniforms. So there was this whole thing about what is happening? Is this and you could see from the reactions to that there were people who said, well, we don't really. Why are schoolgirls coming out to do this? We can do this. We can do this. We don't need these girls to be doing these. But equally, there was this attempt to sort of discipline them, as it were, by going to their parents to say, well, okay, these are your women, these are your female children. How can you not? If this happens, these are girls. So there's that aspect around what women can do, and then still other people who highlighted the fact that this moment taking this form at this moment in 2017 may be new. Because these girls were protesting, of course, because these soldiers would come into their schools and would exercise power arbitrarily, things like that. So, but there were other people who pointed out, well, there's a long history of women who have been resisting and who have been part of resistance in fighting, and in some cases even fighting with weapons. So in Kashmir, women used rifles, were trained to use rifles, which was, I think, a first in that region in way early on in the mid part of the 20th century to rebel against the invasion. So there are other, so people construct different histories on whether women are always resilient, they're always resisting, or they're heroic and martyrs, focusing on specific civil society figures, as I mentioned before, activists, women activists who have acted as important and significant custodians of collective memory and that witnessing. Also, this, of course, like in any nationalist struggle, there's this idea of the mother, of valorizing this figure of the, of the not only the nation as mother, but also this figure of the mother who waits for the return of her children, but specifically her sons, and who is resilient and who kind of, does that as the years come and go. So there's that kind of narrative of bravery and heroism as well that women find themselves in. But like with other places, there's also this thing around women being the moral policing around what women can or can't do. Now again, they're not straightforwardly simplifiable stories. So there's this thing of what women can and can't do because they are women, but also what women because they are women and because they are women who belong to a certain culture, which is that culture of those people who have that religion. Yeah, in that context, at this point, it means something very specific in the self-understanding as, women who belong to Islam, women who belong to a region where people are Muslims. But then there's also, that story isn't complete unless you also draw attention to women who are Muslim, but are also seen as Muslim others by the soldiers who are there and who will, if they, at various points, acted in ways to harass them, or so there's also that aspect of the occupation, which is a central part of that story. It's not simply about social moral policing, it's also about how that interacts with the fact that it is a zone of occupation. It is a zone where soldiers rape women and get away with it. Famous cases in Ethiopia, Asia, Nilofer, Kulan Poshpura, where people just do that, where harassing women is a way of getting back at the men. The idea is that if Kashmiri women are humiliated or harassed, or then that is also a sort of an insult to Kashmiri men. So women then become in this at the they are sort of placed at the center of different kinds of patriarchal discourses, but making sense of that without bringing in the occupation and the conflicted nature of the situation is, to me, does not make sense. That because you have to see how this particular form and of women's lives, of their texture of their daily lives, is affected deeply by being in a place where there are guns everywhere and soldiers everywhere. So that is the to draw attention to, as you said, the multiple insecurities that women find themselves at the intersection of, and that they resist through their through everyday means of making myths, of memories, of memorializing, of their own interactions with each other, of specific kinds of spaces that they inhabit differently. So there's those instances of solidarity as well that that must be pointed out. But the other question that I think I was thinking about is, when we it is very hard to convey this to without actually knowing much more of the context, not even to just a European audience, but even to an Indian audience. Because there's a whole set of associations that people have. If they think of Kashmiri Muslim women, there's then a catalogue of images that come with, and so it is, and I think, and it's the same as if we think of, Kashmiri men or Indian even. So it depends. But in specific cases, these stereotypical associations can actually be, enabling and facilitating other kinds of violent projects, because if we don't question them. So I think it's also a matter of stopping to ask ourselves, why do we understand something this way? Why do we understand this understanding? Why do we have this understanding of Kashmiri women? And how can we sort of make that as much based on hard work, more than anything else, like empathy research, but also hard work, than simply working from a prior understanding. I will, as I hand you the mic, can I just scroll through some of these images, because then I think last time I forgot. So these are images from Kashmir last year. So this is a, I can just click on the page, it's a photo essay that you can, so that is barbed wire, symbolic of, so Burhan Wani was this, so you can just imagine how Burhan Wani was, he was a militant, right? He was a militant who had not been involved in any killings so far, but he was a militant who was very popular on social media. right? And he was, unlike other militants, he didn't cover his face. So, you know, he actively sort of was everywhere on social media, and young people followed him and looked up to him. The average life of a militant in Kashmir is 7 years, and the story is that he was radicalized when his elder brother was, I mean, that's what one reads, that his elder brother was treated badly by the security forces, and that kind of led to him joining as well. But you know, there are various ways of looking at it, but I guess the central part is to understand that Burhan Wani is for Indians is a terrorist. For Kashmiris, Burhan Wani is a hero. And that is like fundamentally it, because, you know, the state, when they killed him, they sort of killed him rather than capturing him and doing the due process thing. So they just kill people. And he was like many of these men, they are not super trained resistance, whatever people, you know. The total number of militants in Kashmir is less than a couple of hundred. So it's the might of this state that is fighting, you know, less than, even the most like liberal estimates, less than 500 people. So it's not about the number of those militants. It's about the way in which the entire population, or the large majority of the population, does not want, you know, to continue to be occupied and continue to have their human rights abused. So when there are encounters between the Indian armed forces and the militants, like I said, both men, but villagers come in and they start throwing stones at the army. So, and then the army head has said that if villagers do that, then they will be treated as terrorists too, and they will be shot as terrorists. So it's not a case of, you know, a sort of a war type situation. It's a case of an entire population that, you know, that does not give its consent to be ruled in the same way. And that is, I think, the fundamental part of that, the way in which that coloniality is structured by gender. So, welcome to Pakistan. So this is sometimes people even raise China slogans. It's like, obviously Pakistan is seen as an ally, but also now more and more seen as an ally that didn't do much. And like I said in the earlier session, there's this whole indigenous move now, and young people who also resist through, who also create resistance through rap, through music. There's even a female rapper called, it's an anagram of Eminem, it's called Many May, but there's others as well. So if you look for Kashmir music, there's also people who use art to do that. This is not an unusual sight. These are you know, various kinds of vehicles with soldiers and with their hands on triggers, which are positioned at every other street corner. You know, in fact, if you're going through traffic on the highways, you would see soldiers, always men, with you know, a gun and a bat. So a gun and a bat standing there at the ready, all dotted all along the highways. So it's just, I mean, the atmosphere is deeply, deeply militarized by these men soldiers, Indian men soldiers everywhere. And you know, people say graffiti is infra-politics, and it truly is. It reflects both the overflow of the political and the personal in any city space. So it is in Kashmir as well. It says Indian assholes. And the other image is of Maqbool Bhatt, who was you know, hanged by the Indian state in 80s, and in 2013 another Kashmiri person, Afzal Guru, was hanged by India, by the Indian court, and the judgment said he was being hanged on the basis of circumstantial evidence for his part in an attack on the Indian Parliament, but others were acquitted. He was the only one who was hanged. And it was on the basis of circumstantial evidence, and he didn't really satisfy the rarest of the rare criterion, which according to jurisprudence you're supposed to within that context. But they hanged him anyway, and the judgment said it was done to satisfy the collective conscience of the Indian nation. This was actually part of the judgment, that to satisfy the collective conscience. So there's clear understanding of a revenge us them type thing there. This one just says, go India, go back, which you'll see everywhere, but also this Kala Kala CRPF Wala. So there's this idea of Indians as people who are darker skinned people, and as people whose migrant populations, migrant workers from Indian plains often come to work in Kashmir in the summers, and they are actually not, they are not treated violently or anything. So again, this way in which this conflict is not about a personal level of violence. It's this. These are soldiers in a locality, as you can see, any street at any point, but this is like a resistance street. Again, go India, go back, and the Indian soldiers who are serving right next to that. This is the pictures that you won't see in the picture postcards, which is not to say that there aren't beautiful regions too, but this is to say that it's not only a beautiful exotic place for tourism. There are also all kinds of problems that, you know, in the back alleys. This is we want freedom, but then that's constantly where you can see it everywhere. We want freedom, and you can constantly see you know, that being changed and borderarized to make it read something other than freedom. Soldiers. This is in the center on a big mosque, 8 lakh Indian uniformed terrorists versus defenseless Kashmiris. So there's clearly a self-understanding as well of what this is about, which is that there's this overwhelming number of soldiers, a small number of militants, and a population that doesn't want to be part of the state in the same way. Of course, you know, you can read the facts elsewhere, but and maybe Emma will talk about it, that there was this promise of a plebiscite way back, and the accession was conditional upon that. Cricket and so in London in 2017, there was a match between India and Pakistan, a cricket match, and people in in that region are crazy about cricket. And there was this jersey that somebody wore: "Whoever wins gets Kashmir." That's not an inaccurate understanding of how these populations see it. Like it's this thing of Kashmir is like a prize. A prize to be won by these people, and that is quite interesting that Indian international teams do not play in Kashmir because West Indies, I think, West Indies played there in the 1980s, and so it was an India versus West Indies match, and everyone in Kashmir was cheering for West Indies. Even the West Indies team was surprised that they were playing in Srinagar, but everyone was cheering for them rather than for India. So this is it's not a recent thing. So after that, international cricket matches are not played because of this. There's just these other images. But curfew and the impact on women, especially small girls, who have even less, mobilities and freedoms. And so curfews, you can have curfews for months on end, including snapping of telecommunication for months on end. Like in 2016, that was the case, but also at a point in 2017. So then people just have to be indoors, including children. These are Indian migrant workers. This person sitting here, these people, they are all part of that. This woman in, I don't know, yeah, she's Parveena Hangar, the chairperson of ATBP. And they have the vigils, as I told you, about the, against enforced disappearances. Sorry, I'll just let you talk now.
No, I think maybe we should open up for some questions from the audience. I think we have like 3 more minutes. So I don't know. Do you have any questions?
If we don't have a session, we can overrun.
Yeah. Do you have any questions? Does anybody? I know it's Sunday afternoon, everybody's quite tired, it's been a long weekend.
I mean, maybe we can ask them a question. Like, ask them about feminist perspectives on Kashmir. What do they, what would they...
What have you...
somebody answer.
Yeah. What do you think a feminist perspective on Kashmir is? What did you expect when you came here today?
What do you think a feminist perspective? What do you think of feminist perspectives on conflict? Like, do you have maybe experience of working in such places or writing about such things or thinking? Like, maybe you can tell us something as well. Like how you see these struggles. Or what to you is even a feminist perspective on conflict? What is a feminist perspective?
Were you aware about Sweden's arms trade with India and the kind of the extent of it in India and Pakistan? No. No? Some of you were and some of you were not. And again, kind of thinking through that and thinking about what that actually means in terms of how can we actually then put pressure on the Swedish government, particularly considering, I know this election's coming up soon as well, so we're in a kind of a very, very fragile, very kind of fluid stage as well in Swedish politics at the moment. Yeah.
I think also because it was not long ago that Mobilize came to Sweden either, and the cooperation is growing. So it's really time to do something, and you spoke about it and those connections and things, but what can we do, you think? How can we how can we put Kashmir on the Swedish map so people know about Kashmir, and how can we address our government, how can we get media to take notice, how can we put pressure.
I think that's really interesting. Maybe Emma, you should answer it, and then I will speak to you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that's why this event has been organized today, is to start this conversation, because there is very little work done by Swedish activists, Swedish scholars on Kashmir. We have the Nordic Kashmir organization, which is a quite new organization, and they are working very hard to bring Kashmir up on the agenda, to bring it to media. It is quite hard. I've been trying to publish. I published one opinion piece on SVT's opinions hemsida on the website, and it was very difficult to get it published. I sent that piece to Dagens Nyheter, to Aftonbladet, and all other major media outlets. And this was in 2016, during the summer, when more than thousands of people were blinded by pellet guns, and many were killed. And but I was quite frustrated then about the silence in Swedish media. But again, like, I met a brick wall when I was trying to publish that. And obviously, again, like, I can write in Swedish, but I'm also an outsider being based at an Irish university at that stage. So I think it's important to have these conversations, to start having these events. That's why I'm so grateful for the Nordic Kashmir organization and Mana for inviting us here. And so it's about, raising these issues and kind of putting pressure on the government, trying to talk to people and try to find information yourselves. Start reading, Nitasha's work, start following Nordic Kashmir organization on Facebook, start kind of seeking out these events or inviting speakers to your universities, to your organizations, or wherever you're based to bring this issue up. There's a lot of people in the UK, which is not too far away, that are working on Kashmir, and as well hopefully a growing number of people in Sweden as well. There's a lot of documentary films, there's a lot of other type of media resources that can be brought in very easily. So Nordic Kashmir organization, I think, is a good starting point to to talk to if you want to organize something where you are.
Thank you. Yes, that's actually just the question that we should be asked. So to follow up on what Emma said, just firstly, obviously, read a lot more about fiction, non-fiction, anything that you can find to. I heard yesterday, in my interactions with people here, that people know of Arundhati Roy, or some people know of her. So, read novels, read essays, read things that speak about these places where conflict is big, and especially the ones that people don't often know of, like Kashmir. So, read. I would also say, in the UK context, one would say write to your MP. But these days it's more and more email your MP, but find ways of questioning representatives, and also especially media organizations. It is mind-bogglingly frustrating, and I spent last 48 hours being in and out of that state of thinking, why can the world media not report these things? What is it about the fact that a person can be used as a human shield or run over, or you actually have to have something, I don't know, how drastic do things have to become in some parts of the world before it even makes newsprint here? So there's a very systematic way in which this kind of news about places where the victims are Muslim, as in this case in Kashmir, and the oppressor is India, which is a democracy, in the eyes of the West. It's also a market, and that's probably more important. That this kind of thing just doesn't get coverage. I mean, it's not even only for the Kashmiris, it's also for all the people who are trying to raise their voice against the current Indian regime, who are also in India, and that includes Dalit activists, peasants, students, a whole range of people who are media, journalists. Everyone who is being labeled anti-national in the current Indian climate of this rising Hindu supremacism, which is, which I can't imagine that if it weren't this idea of India as Hindu and as a democracy and this kind of spiritual image, whatever, in the West, so many more people would know about it. So please, like, seek out other stories about India that you will not normally find in mainstream news press, like you do about other parts of the world. But maybe people bring you stories, you know, of the Middle East / West Asia or of Pakistan or Indonesia or other places, but maybe you won't hear these stories just as well from some parts of the world. And India, I think, at the present moment is one of those places. And as you rightly said, as Modi goes everywhere, so, you know, there's this thing around an active effort to recruit Indian diaspora for those, you know, for that project, Hindutva project, which is also very dangerous, not just for Kashmiris, but it's also very dangerous for people in India. I mean, it's also a whole range of people in India who are facing the violence of that project. So to do that, and I think the answer, as Emma said, is like, once you know why you want to know about it, something, once you have that answer figured, like, why do I want to know about Kashmir? Then you'll know what you can do to find out. You know, like, I want to know because these people are dying and I want to know about it. Then you'll know what can I do. So it's like, why do I want to know about something, and then what can I do? It does follow, and there are enough resources, you know, especially I think very grateful to technology for making some of these connections possible. And I think, you know, 20 years ago we would not even know each other in the different worlds that we sometimes inhabit. So technology in that sense makes it possible for us to recognize affinities and affiliations and struggles that are not necessarily immediately otherwise presented to us. So, you know, make use of that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add actually the weapon deals between Sweden to India and Pakistan. According to the Sweden in law, you know, Sweden cannot sell the weapons in a war zone. But it's not just 90s, it was sold in 80s, you know, the Bofors guns, and it's still going on using the control line of both sides, you know, either this side or other side, killing Kashmiris. And also in early 2000 when the General Musharraf came to Stockholm, so he bought the JAWS, not JAWS weapon, but the Orient plan. This is a high altitude radar planes. So they come, for example, the Bofors gun there is a control line, and then giving the direction, okay, like that's you know, target point. And at the same time, other Swedish weapon, you know, in a high altitude radar is giving directions to the Pakistanis to, okay, there's an Indian, you know, bunker or this as you can kill. So it's like it's going on and on and on. So it's not just one side; it's both sides. So Sweden making, you know, milking this conflict from both sides. And as you said, Nordic Kashmir organization, I'm one of the founder. So we started 4 years ago. But it's a long history. Back in 2008, we did one event, and even 2004 in Skåne Social Forum, and it was like, and then European Social Forum here, and then we did Stockholm, quite many activities. So it's please follow our Facebook page. So it's like we want to put more Nordic-centric rather than, yes, it's we cannot update daily by daily. So what's going on in Kashmir, because it's too much. So we need to focus with Nordic perspective, and obviously we need to make alliances and solidarity with all other oppressed nations.
There are no other questions, right?
Can I just add an important thing when it comes to reading about Kashmir, if it's in the news or on Twitter or whatever, the language is also colonized, the language that media is using. So it's very important that we also debunk that part.
And Kashmiri scholars increasingly now are writing. So recently there was a very interesting piece by Hafsa Kajwal and Mohammed Junaid saying that, you know, why the Washington Post coverage was, or New York Times coverage was wrong. New York Times coverage was wrong.
Oh, I could have spoken without the mic. Okay. Do you want to go first?
Okay. Yes, I am concerned that women rights in Kashmir, but my concern is women rights all over the world. So the point is that in which way we can literate the peoples, that we must understand what kind of rights the woman has. So I especially talk about the subcontinent, I mean to say India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, who are not so much literate. Their families keep on telling to their kids that we should respect mother. Then they said we should respect our sister. But we should respect our mother, or we should respect other mothers also. Suppose if I am married and I have a wife, and she came to our house, and we hang a carrot and we say like that we should respect the woman, but she is also a mother. So if we understand this concept that we should respect everyone, then I think everything will be.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
So that's, let me just ask you a question first. Do you identify as a feminist?
Yes, I understand this.
No. Do you think of yourself as feminist?
No. I mean to say.
Okay, so that's our first. So that's the thing where I think we should begin from. So if you want people to respect women,
yes,
all people to respect women globally, and you want to struggle for women's rights, the first thing I would say is to begin from yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, we should all begin from ourselves, and to ask yourself, why do I not call myself a feminist? Feminists aren't only women, men can be feminists too. So you should actively find out what is feminism. You know, it's really great that you came to a session on feminist perspectives on Kashmir. You should now think about being a feminist, and a good feminist at that, and trying to think of what does that mean. Because you know, it's right and it's very good that you're saying that we should respect women. But the thing is, you see, the problem is, if we think of respecting women as daughters, and as mothers, and as wives, then we are only thinking of them as connected to men, through the relationality with men. Whereas men are not thought of, we don't think of like men only as whatever, you know, so women should as only as fathers or why? I mean, there are men and women and people who may choose to either be neither, you know, neither men nor women, you know. So as individual people, anyone should be respected for whatever choices that they have. And we should not think that men are superior and women are not, which clearly you don't want to.
Yeah.
But that is exactly part of what the feminist project is. So I think that it's, you know, that it would be, it's good that you are here, and I would urge you to really think of, you know, being that person who can say, I'm a feminist. So the next time you sit with other men, you know, who say, what's your name? Falak. And who say like, Falak, what's happened to you? Why do you? Then you can tell them like, you know, I'm a feminist because. And that's so powerful because, you know, as a man, if you say that I'm a feminist, that will, you know, that kind of makes some of that, breaks through some of those difficulties. So I understand what you're saying, but I would say that I would have been much happier if you'd said I'm a feminist.
I'm so sorry, but we have to stop because the next one is starting.
All right, okay. So sorry, we'll finish. Thank you.
No. Okay.
Can I just say one thing
straight
to
please.
the camera? I wanted to say this since the morning.
Please.
It is possible. Whoever you are watching this, if you're, you know, maybe you deal with arms yourself, maybe you're part of the arms trade, maybe you make money out of it, maybe you think conflicts are unimportant. Change is possible. You can do this. You know, it's worth it. It's worth it for everyone to think about what it is that they're doing and how that connects to the wider conflict and violence that's happening. And you know, so many of us teeter on the edge of that, like, you know, but it makes sense for me to do this. But it doesn't. If what you're doing is making the world a worse place, then you're part of the problem. And you need to join those dots. And it's possible and you'll be happier.